Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for everybody who loves stories about interesting people and events told by those who uncovered them from within their own family trees. This, we hope, will inspire you to discover and celebrate your history and your story. Many of you may remember Academy Award-winning actor Anthony Quinn for his roles in famous movies such as Lawrence of Arabia, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Zorba the Greek. But some may not know that Anthony was also a gifted and prolific artist and art collector. His art was not limited to any specific medium. He loved oil painting, woodworking, sculptures, and more. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, our guest is Anthony Quinn's widow, Kathy Quinn. Kathy will share stories from the life of her husband that will include his humble beginnings in Chihuahua, Mexico, his move to the United States as a young boy, and his fascinating acting career with highlights from some of his key movie roles. Kathy will also talk about her late husband's deep passion for art, learning, and observing people and things in his environment. In 2007, Kathy began the Anthony Quinn Foundation to honor her husband's memory and his love for the arts by providing scholarships for high school students who wish to attend a recognized pre-college or summer intensive art education program. I'd now like to welcome Kathy Quinn to our show. Welcome, Kathy.
Hey, James. Nice to see you again.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the show. Actually, it's very exciting because we're going to talk about your late husband, Anthony Quinn. And that name, Anthony Quinn, really sparked so many memories. I remember my mom, she loved the movie Lawrence of Arabia. She just loved that movie. And Anthony Quinn, I heard his name around our house all the time.
Everyone has their favorites, so somebody will remember him for Zorba. Lawrence is a big one. Guns of Navarone, there's some, well-known movies, and everybody's got a favorite role and that they identify with, I think, or that inspires them somehow.
Oh, yeah, definitely. My dad was a big war movie guy, and Guns of Navarone was a big movie for him. So that's kind of cool. But I'm also excited to talk to you about the Anthony Quinn Foundation and how that came to be. Let's first talk about Anthony Quinn. We'll go back to what I understand are very humble beginnings for him. Where was he born and what were the early years of his life like?
So he was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, which is a very little known fact. Maybe Mexicans know that, but he was born in Chihuahua, Mexico. His father was born in Mexico. His grandfather came from Ireland, from County Roscommon, Ireland, and went to Mexico as a part of a group of, during the famine to build a railroad. They were bringing Irish engineers. So his grandfather was an engineer to build the railroad to go, across the U.S. And so his father was born there in Mexico, in Chihuahua, actually a smaller town called Parral. And his mother was born in Mexico, and she had native Indian roots with the Tarahumara. She spent some time with the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico, and they were very young. His parents were very young. His father went to fight in the Mexican Revolution with Pancho Villa. And he met Anthony's mother just before, and he invited her, which was, not a lot of people know this, but Mexican ladies would fight in the war, where they would go to war with the men. They would cook for them, they would clean their guns, they would take care of them. So if they didn't go off to war and have to figure things out by themselves, the 18-year-olds don't really know how to do things for themselves. Smart, they brought the women with them. And that was their first time they spent together. And while she was there, she got pregnant. And they sent her home because the generals would regularly go through the troops. And if a woman was pregnant, they would send her back home because they didn't want to have pregnant women on the battlefield. So that's how they met. And then he was born in Chihuahua. The revolution was still going on. And his father had not come back yet, but his mother had to leave because life was getting very difficult. So she snuck him on a train in a coal car, begged the engineer to give them a passage because she didn't have money for a ticket. And they made their way to El Paso, Texas, and lived in a refugee camp for the first couple of years of life.
Wow. So mom takes him into El Paso, Texas. So now in another country, there's a language barrier right away. So he had to grow up in an area where his mom, I would imagine, didn't speak English at that time.
El Paso is this kind of place where there are a lot of Mexicans, and there was a refugee camp. So they lived along the Rio Grande River. It's not like they moved into an American neighborhood. All the Mexicans were doing that. They lived really in just groups of people. His mom would find work. She would do washing for people. She would pick up twigs for people to start fires for cooking. She would make tortillas. She was very resourceful, creative woman. And, he said from a very young age, he would help her. The first he could start to walk, he would pick up sticks, and he remembered it not as we were poor. We were, these poor Mexicans living in a refugee. For him, it was beautiful life with his mother. Like they were so close. And he just remembers loving it. He remembers being a young boy and just loving. He said he didn't know he was poor until he later on, he lived in LA, East LA with the Mexicans, but then he realized they lived in the poor neighborhood and there was this other side of town. So for the longest time, he was just like, this is life. This is my family, my family life. I think when you have nothing to compare to, and as long as you can eat and you have a place to sleep, I guess that's your life. So you don't really know you're poor.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But at some point in time, though, his dad does reunite with the family.
Yeah, he did. He came back when Tony was about 2. He left again. He came back again. The story about his dad is I've found some stuff out after he passed away that's makes it a little bit more complicated. I think his father was coming and going a lot before he decided to stay with the family, which was when he was around 4, 5. Then they started traveling as they worked on the railroad, laying tracks. And then his father hurt his hand very badly, got a spike put right through his hand, went to a hospital in LA to be taken care of because he almost died. And then that's how they ended up in LA in this Mexican neighborhood, eventually. But they were fruit pickers. They were working on the railroad. They would do migrant work or like Grapes of Wrath. That was his life. They were just traveling around. And then they were in California, where there was a huge, huge Mexican population, but they weren't treated very well. So he grew up in this, age of terrible discrimination that people think is bad now, but it was horrible. They hated Mexicans. They were treated like dogs. There were signs. My son was doing research for a school project, and he said when Dad won his Oscar, there were signs outside of restaurants saying no Mexicans, no blacks, no dogs.
Oh.
This was, in the 50s. So it was bad.
But what a challenging beginning to his life. Again, when he was really young, he didn't know anything different, but all of a sudden he's faced with that. But doesn't his dad get into the movie business somehow?
Yeah, so he couldn't work anymore as a manual laborer. So he went to work at a zoo called Seligs, and Seligs was like a movie studio, also zoo that was connected with a lot of the motion pictures in those days were being made on studio lots, and they would use animals, and this zoo provided the animals for a lot of the movies. And his father took care of the animals, took care of the panthers, but then eventually learned how to operate a camera. So he was learning how to be a camera operator, and that was the Hollywood connection. And he tried to put Anthony in a movie once, when he was 4 years old. And the night before, he got a high fever and he got sick, and he never got to be in the movie. He was supposed to play like I don't know what he was supposed to play. But anyway, that was a theme in his life. He would often, when he was making a movie, something would happen, like with his eye. When he played the Pope, he got an infection in his eye. When he played the Hunchback of Notre Dame, he got a skin disease. But it was almost like self-manifested with his spirit.
Oh, so he was just getting into the character so much.
Into the character so much, yeah.
So let's talk about, how did Anthony then, when he got started, I understand his dad died pretty young, didn't he? And Anthony had to sort of become the breadwinner in the family?
Yeah, so he got hit by a car right in front of their house and died instantly. Actually, it was a truck. I have the newspaper article from the time, and it was a truck hit him, died instantly. Anthony was 11 years old, and it was just him, his mother, his grandmother, his sister, and at that time they were living they had a house in East LA in Boyle Heights, but they had cousins and aunts and other relatives constantly moving in and out of the house, and he was really the only. He felt that at that time that his dad was gone and he had to be the man of the family. So from that point on, school became difficult because he would go to school, but then he would get jobs so that he could earn money. So he was doing all kinds of jobs throughout his young teenage life, thinking he had to be the man to help provide. His mother always worked. She always had jobs doing, I think for a while she worked in a tire factory. So she was always a laborer, but he always thought he had to help provide for the family. So he would go out and skip school, and he never, in his long story, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but he only made it to, I think, 10th or 11th grade.
10th or 11th grade. So when he started to earn a living, didn't he start also boxing at one point?
Yes, he boxed. Yeah, he was training to box, but then he fought in a lot of fights, but he would always get knocked out at the end. And his trainer said, you have to get out of this business because you don't have the killer instinct. You don't have the instinct to harm. And throughout his life, he really was. I mean, he had this reputation of being like a thug because of the roles he played, and a tough guy and a womanizer, but he was such an artist in his heart. He was so tender about the smallest things, and he didn't have anger, like hatred in him. And so I think you have to have that kind of toughness. It's like playing football. You have to know how to tackle someone and just want to destroy them. I don't know. He just didn't have that. So he didn't have the killer instinct. So he started doing other things. He would go and enter dance contests and drawing contests. And he really, really wanted to, his ideal was to be an artist. He loved art. He loved drawing and painting. And so that became, he didn't think he was good enough to be an artist, where in his mind, an artist who like Michelangelo, Da Vinci. So he aimed to be an architect. That was, he felt like he settled on a doable career goal when he wanted to be an architect.
So he was dreaming big, but he also had to put food in his belly and the belly of others in his family. But he does get into show business. Did I hear that one of the first people to give him a chance in show business was Mae West?
Yes, but the first person, and I listened to a couple of your podcasts since we spoke last. And one theme where you say like the people who influence you, like the people you meet and how they influence you, and you never know when it's going to be that person who really could be one person who turns your life around. And that was, believe it or not, Frank Lloyd Wright, because his dream to be an architect led him to enter this contest. And teachers or people would say, there's this contest you can win to meet Frank Lloyd Wright. So he did. He did a drawing of a supermarket or something. He got to meet Frank Lloyd Wright. But when he went to meet him, and he brought all of his little drawings with him, a portfolio, and Wright said, "I don't want to see those. What's wrong with your speech?" And he's mumbling and stumbling, and he didn't know he had a problem with the speech. You grew up in a poor neighborhood in the ghetto, you really don't know anything's wrong. Like nobody says you have a speech impediment. He was tongue tied. So it was a physical impairment where you have a little piece of skin under your tongue that's too thick. These days it's one of those things they check when you're born, and they snip it if it's too thick. So you never have that problem. He was already now 17 years old. So Frank Lloyd Wright said, "Well, look, I'm going to send you to a doctor to take care of that." And he did. He snipped his frenulum under his tongue. But then that sends you down this route. You have to learn how to speak again, because now all of a sudden you have a tongue that moves like it never did before. So he went to an acting studio, and he bartered the teacher because he didn't have money to pay for it. So he would walk to Hollywood Hollywood and Vine, there was a school called Miss Hamill's School for Young Actors, and she would give him lessons, and then he would be the janitor for the theater, and there were other kids rehearsing, and she put him in a play because one of the kids dropped out. She said, Tony, you've been watching the kids, you know the lines, we rehearsed the lines. I want you to put you in the play. He was instantly lit up by it. He loved the energy of being on a stage. But then it was 1937, so he was 18 years old when this happened. And no, 1933, because he was 18. And it was the Depression. People were struggling, so he couldn't just be an actor, right? So he couldn't look for parts. And so he would go to school and he would get jobs and he would do this back and forth. And then after that, the teacher invited him to join the Actors Theater and join the group and doing a play called Clean Beds, which was really based on the life of John Barrymore. Mm-hmm. And Mae West producing it. And he went to audition and he had to really age himself because Barrymore was in almost 50, I think, at the time. And here he was 18. He always had a young boy's face. And he had someone help him with his makeup and made him look older. And Mae West said, I like the kid. He's got something. And, she put him in the play. That was a big deal.
Oh, definitely a big deal. So
then John Barrymore went to see the play and they became friends. Another long story.
These are interesting people that he's meeting. So he starts getting some roles in some movies. I noticed when I look at the movies that Anthony was in, he's often playing different ethnic roles. He played a Native American. He plays a part of a Greek person, an Arab person, an Italian, a Latino. They're often ethnic parts. Can we just talk about some of those movies that he ends up getting into in his earlier career, and also talk about there was a shift, I think it might have been in the 1940s, where he decides actually to go back to acting school, even though he's already been acting. But let's first talk about some of his earlier movies.
Well, his first ever movie, I think, when he was a teenager, he used to say his name was Quinn. He was living in the Mexican neighborhood, and the Irish were just as poor as the Mexicans too. So there were the Irish kids, and then there were the Mexican kids, and they often fought with each other. But his name was Quinn, and he had a Mexican face, and so he never knew which side to take. Should I be with the Irish kids, or because the Mexicans used to say, "You're not Mexican. Your name is Quinn." And then the Irish kid said, "You look too Mexican to be one of us." Right. So he said, even in those days, he didn't have an identity like that. He could say, "I'm a Mexican, I'm an Italian, and so he became, later on, he would say, "I became a man of the world because I never felt like I fit in anywhere." But when his first ever movie role, well, not his first speaking role, he was playing a Cheyenne Indian. It was in a Cecil B. DeMille movie called The Plainsman. And he showed up because a friend of his was working in the makeup department at, I think it was Paramount, I'm not sure, the studio that did it. And so his friend said, "Hey, you could get away with this. You could play an Indian." And he said, "I'll help you get ready for makeup so that you could do the screen test." And he got the part, and he's on the set, and he pretends that he's a real Indian. Even when he was doing the screen test, he pretended he didn't know how to speak English. He pretended he was a Cheyenne Indian with just gibberish that he made up. And he made up a song, and he had to come into the scene on a horse and sing this song. And then he had to sit by this fire, and he kept running away from the fire. And Gary Cooper was supposed to come over and, find him there or something. And he kept running away from the fire. And DeMille would say, "Cut, he's got to sit by the fire." And then he would say, "Rolling." And then he would roll, and then he would run away again. And so this happened several times. And then DeMille said, "Get some other Indian. This kid doesn't understand direction." And so he finally, he knew he was getting fired. So he said, "No, I'm not an idiot, Mr. DeMille. I just know that a real Indian would never stay by a white man's fire." And so I ran away, and he's like, then he gets really upset, get rid of this kid. And Gary Cooper was the one to stand up for him. He said, he's right, Mr. DeMille. That's, he wouldn't sit by the fire if he was a real Indian. So he kept the role. They made friends. He fell in love with Cecil B. DeMille's daughter during the filming. She was there. She wasn't in that movie, but she was there. So just going back to your question, that was, one of his first roles that he did so well. He convinced a world-renowned director that he was a Cheyenne Indian. And then he kept getting those ethnic roles. He would get Indian roles as an Indian, but they were kind of like the B roles, the gangster, the Italian gangster, the Chinese warlord. It was just crazy. So that was how his whole first 10, 15 years of his career, he was playing an ethnic character. And he just, something about maybe his the way he speak, his face, it was believable. And he had this amazing ability to relate to almost anyone. And he could just, I don't know, he found the humanity in and it really, I think what he found was also that people are the same, no matter where you go. But he was able to pick up. I watched Zorba the Greek once on a big screen. It was Martin Scorsese who restored that film after Anthony died. And I had always seen it before that on a TV, on a video, but seeing on a big screen restored was unbelievable. How he got like the facial expressions of a Greek, the little things they do with their mouth or their hands. And I was like, how did he do that? He just would pick up things, and that's an artist.
Definitely an artist. And I know that it was certainly back in the earlier days, and really probably not that long ago, it was difficult for somebody like Anthony, who was of Mexican descent, to get a role as a leading role. Isn't that true? It was very difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah. So his first leading role by Hollywood standards was in 1947, a movie called Black Gold. And he played a horse owner, I think, and he had a Chinese adopted son, and they had this horse that they entered in the Kentucky Derby or some famous race. And anyway, it's not a well-known movie, but then his agents or his friends said, Tony, you got your first starring role in the movie. Now you're on your way. And he said, now I'm on my way to New York so I can really learn how to act. So that was that turning point. He went to New York. He moved his 4 kids to Connecticut, and he went back and forth to New York City and took lessons at the Actors Studio, and did a couple of Broadway plays, and then went off to Europe, because that's what a lot of, they were saying, I think he was sent there to make a movie with Dino De Laurentiis, famous director. So he was hired for that movie, but then he was like, oh my God, these Italians are making, amazing movies, like not like Hollywood movies where people are just dancing, singing in the rain, very big productions. They were making movies about feelings, about, and they were so different. It was emotional, it was deep, it wasn't superficial like Hollywood was. So it was going to Europe for the first time in his life was really like a big turning point in his life.
A couple of things there then. So the amount of humility that Anthony had to take acting lessons, to have that level of self-examination, to pause and say, hey, I want to learn more about how to be better. Right. And this kind of reflects in some things we're going to talk about how he just always wanted to learn and do better and get better in a role or get better with his art. It seems to be a theme with Anthony. But when he went to Italy, he made a movie called La Strada, 1954. And I actually watched some of this movie, and it's a very emotional movie. It's a very unusual movie. And you talk about feelings from these Italian movies. And certainly what I was watching made me feel like this is a very emotional movie. And he was such a, I don't know, he's kind of this, it seemed like a very violent tough man, but he also had this very emotional side. What did playing that role mean to Anthony?
I think as an actor, maybe that time he spent in New York, really learning how to act, that finally came out. I mean, he was studying with Marlon Brando. Marlon was much younger than he was, but he was in the same class at Stella Adler's studio. And that type of acting was way more, it was called method acting, emotional than he had ever learned, when he was in Hollywood. And when he was there making another movie, he met Fellini. And he had heard Fellini is a famous director, but he had only made a couple of movies. I mean, he's famous. He was like a young up and coming director, and oh, you should work with him. And he met him. He was making another movie, and he was introduced to Fellini. Fellini didn't speak English. Tony at the time didn't speak Italian. And he said, I want you to make my movie. And he said, okay, well, give me the script and I'll read it. And Fellini's like, no, I don't have a script. It's on one piece of paper. That was the script. And he said, well, I'm making this other movie. When I'm finished, I'll thank me. Oh, no, we're making it now. We can do European hours. You work on your other movie in the morning, we'll do at night. Or if you work at your other movie at night, you do this in the morning. He didn't have enough money to pay him. So he offered him a percentage of the gross, which is a big deal back then, and he said, okay, fine. He wanted, he loved a challenge. He loved to, do something new. Giulietta Mazzina, who was Fellini's wife, was in the movie, and she was known. She was a well-known Italian actress. So he said yes, and he did the movie. He said showing up on Fellini's set was like walking into somebody's dream. Everything about it was like, you walked on, you got your lines for the day. This is what we're going to do today. This is what we're going to shoot today. And it was like walking into his fantasy world, like in his head. And he thought it was magic, the way it was filmed, the way he did it. And one day, I mean, the movie took them a while to do, but he did it all while he was filming this other movie. They did a scene, and it's a famous scene in that movie where they're traveling performers, like circus, like carnival people, right? So they go and they do this. They have this bit, a strongman bit. He has a chain around his chest. He breaks the chain, and they're like, "Whoa, he's so strong," And it's kind of, everybody knows it's cheesy and it's phony, but they do this act just like a carnival act. And they have real people in this, in all the scenes. And there are these people who are there surrounding the town square where he's doing this performance. And they're all cheering, yay, because it's Anthony Quinn. And they're cheering and they love it. And they're having, and they cut, they shoot, they wrap for the day. He goes home. He gets a call at 2 a.m. from Fellini. He was like, what is going on? He said, you have to come back in the morning. We have to reshoot that scene. He was like, why? Everybody loved it. It was great. And he said, exactly. The reason it's supposed to be bad. You're bad performers. You're not, people are supposed to just look confused and not. And so they had to reshoot the whole scene because he wanted that real, people don't go to a carnival and see it and everything's happy. So it was the reality, that raw, that Tony loved that. Then he went back to Hollywood. He was at the time married to Cecil B. DeMille's daughter. Cecil B. DeMille, he said, you have to see what they're doing in Italy. They're making these movies. And he brings a copy of the film because he owns a part of it. So he brings it to his father-in-law. He has a screening at his house. And his father-in-law says, you better sell whatever you have in that picture. Nobody's gonna ever watch movies like that. And he listened to him. He sold his rights in that movie, but it really is a turning point in movie making history. I've heard it said, and I was like, wow, if he only had that. But maybe that happened for a reason. He probably would have become much richer than he was, and that would have made him a different person because he didn't make a good rich person. He was always struggling to make his magic, and he did.
And he did, and he continued to make magic on the screen. I mentioned in the beginning about Lawrence of Arabia, but he was also in roles, incredibly passionate roles, like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. What a sad character, the Hunchback, Quasimodo, I think. I don't know if I say that the right way, but what a sad character, pathetic character. And when I watched his part in that movie, you really get drawn into him. And I did read, I think you mentioned before that he had a physical manifestation of that role where his eye got infected, his face got puffed up and things like that. And it was because he was so intensely in that role that
Right.
he almost became the hunchback, didn't he?
Right. He was becoming monstrous and like that. The director almost fired him. They were like, we have to get somebody else because he caused a delay in the shooting because he had this skin, it was like a severe eczema. And Gina Lollobrigida, who's his co-star, she said, no, I'm not shooting with anybody else but him. So she saved him in that. But she was great. I think it was a beautiful, he played it differently. I mean, that movie's been redone a couple of times. And I think the first version, you don't sympathize with the monster because he ends up, he's a monster, but you don't sympathize with him. And with him, you kind of do because he's in love with Esmeralda, the woman.
It is a very, very powerful role.
He's a simple brute. And that when you go back to Lestrada, he's not a kind person, but he just doesn't know any better. He's just that's how he grew up, and in Lestrada, his character is like that. He's just a very basic brute, but he has a heart. And I think that's Anthony's genius is that he was able to, whatever he played, he always brought some heart to each character.
He's a true artist. And before we segue to that, I want to talk about a movie that I really like. And I happen to like war movies. So Guns of Navarone is one, but also I like boxing movies and
Mhm.
the Requiem for a Heavyweight. Of course, he's in with some pretty big stars in that one, right? Is it Jackie Gleason and Mickey Rooney are in it?
Yes, yes.
And he's the boxer. He's the boxer. And he's again, he's sort of a sad character, because he's the guy that they're sort of making the money from. He's a rising star, sort of, but he's been hit in the head a lot, and he's being manipulated. But you do get that real, I don't know, it's just a powerful emotional role that he played. Did he ever talk about that role with you?
That was a very important role for him because, and you know, why things happen in life. But he was shooting Lawrence of Arabia. They were in the desert in the middle of the movie, and David Lean, who was the director, had a complete blank. He said that the end of the script has to be rewritten. And he went back to Hollywood and that was, I mean, one of the most expensive movies. One of the most interesting, the making of that movie, you have to, watch that someday, is fascinating because it was the first time they used to shoot films like that on a movie set, not in the real desert. And here, David Lean, brought these cameras, these giant cameras out in the desert every single day. They're being pelted by wind and by sand. And so the shooting was so expensive and so, incredibly harsh. And then he stops the filming in the middle of it because he can't see the end of the picture in his head. And he goes back and they actually rewrite the second half of the script. So they've got Anthony Quinn, Alec Guinness, Omar Sharif, these heavyweights in that movie who they're paying. When a studio takes actors under contract, they've got to pay them whether they're shooting or not. It's not the actor's fault that they have to stop and write. So the producer of that film, I think Sam Goldwyn, and I may be wrong about names, but he decided to get each actor another movie to do while they were rewriting the script. So A Requiem for a Heavyweight was the movie that he got for Anthony. And he loved boxing because he had boxing in his background. He was a very loved watching boxers. You interviewed some relative of Primo Carnera. That was one of his favorites. I mean, he always watched every boxing match on TV. He just loved it. He thought it was an art, and back in the Ernest Hemingway too, like, writing about boxing as an art. So he had to play this boxer, but he wanted to play him real. And he was trying so hard. He was really struggling to find this character's voice. He was at the studio and he met this boxer. Well, I don't know if he met him at the studio or he met him at a fight. but his name was A.B. Bain, and he had been boxing for a long time, and he got punched in the throat, and he had a voice, and he talked like that, and he goes, "That's what I need. I need the voice." And he said, "Do you mind? I'm going to use your voice in this picture." And that was the voice he uses. Like he struggles. You saw the movie, and he makes it so real and so sad. And he and Jackie Gleason kind of butted heads on that movie because Jackie Gleason was, I guess, notoriously paranoid that somebody's trying to steal the scene from him. And so he said, "I know Tony's trying to steal this scene from me. So keep an eye on him. Don't let him eat an apple. Don't let him say a word. He's got to be in the background. If he says a word," they're constantly fighting because he would do that. And knew, which is crazy, he knew how to, even if he wasn't speaking in a scene, to make himself noticed. So I guess that comes from his old days of trying to, be someone when you just have a 2-minute role. In Lust for Life that he played with Kirk Douglas, he won the Best Supporting Actor for that movie. And it was the shortest role at that time. I don't know if it still is, but it was a record for the shortest role on screen that ever won an Oscar.
That's a good transition time here, because I was going to ask you about that movie that he was in, Lust for Life. So he co-starred with Kirk Douglas, and the movie was about the artist Vincent van Gogh, and Anthony played the part of Van Gogh's friend, Gauguin, and fellow artist. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that movie, not only because Anthony won Best Supporting Actor for that, but because of the tie-in to Anthony's love of art. Did Anthony's love of art contribute to his success in playing Gauguin in A Lust for Life?
I think his love of art and his talent for art contributed to every role he played, because an artist needs to be a great observer of people, right? In order to be good. I really think you have to see things that other people don't see. And I think that's what artists do. They really show you a different way of looking at something. And somebody made this connection for me again after he died. And I didn't realize, they said, looking at his art, he collected a lot of art. You see around me, I have paintings, and the things behind me he actually made. But he did this all his life. When he was a young boy, drawing, sketching, painting, he started carving. When he was doing movies in the desert, he would find pieces of wood and whittle on them. And he was able to really capture, like some of his early sketches, he was able to capture expressions on faces. And you're just like, how did he do that? So he had this talent. And I think that's because he could see like something behind the eyes. He could see something behind the smile. And so he captured that something, when somebody smiles and you're like, there's not something going on behind there. They're thinking of something. He captured that somehow in a drawing. And this person said it was because he was such a talented artist and he didn't sell his art. He didn't do it as a career. Not that he didn't sell his art. He didn't do it as a career. He did it because it was a way for him to express himself. But when you sell your art, you become a commercial artist, people are going to say, oh, we love, they're going to be drawn to some aspect of it, right? They're going to love something that you do. You're going to do more of that. You're going to, like, if they like your faces or your whatever, you're going to keep doing that because that's what sells. And he didn't have to do that. So he painted and drew and carved all his life. And it was because it was a way of him expressing himself. And I think that he just kept doing that because it was his way of exploring and getting into, more internal, also discovering himself, I think. So it was like this exercise of self-discovery, but he was able to notice. I remember, and I'll tell you, this is just a fast track. We'll go back to, but one day he said to me, you have this blue on your face and your eye. And I was like, who, he would point things out I like live my entire life and look in the mirror, and he would just say this little, your smile is a little bit crooked, and it's just that, that's what makes somebody's personality, what makes you different than somebody else. And I would say, what? He noticed things that you wouldn't notice unless you really like looked at people much deeper than just superficially. And that was his magic, is that he really was able to see through the facade of what we all try to put out in the world and see what was underneath the skin, behind the eyes.
He was an observer. He observed and he absorbed. As he absorbed his characters, it became part of him.
And
Before,
also being interested in other people, because a lot of times you can be kind of think you're great, you think you're pretty great, and you just go through life doing your own thing and not really. You can meet people, say, how are you? He would say, what do you do? Do you have a family? He would ask people a million questions about themselves, not talk about himself. He would talk about them. And I think that digging, just getting to know what makes a person, interesting and real. I saw him do it a million times. He just like was able to make somebody feel important when, they just like sat and played chess in the park. He would talk to those people. Why are you here? Well, how did you learn to play chess? And he would sit down with them, whether they were, the Queen of England, who he met, the Queen of Greece, or the guy in Central Park who's sitting on the park bench feeding the birds. He would treat them the same, really, like with the same interest. Wouldn't treat them the same, but with the same interest of what made that person who they are.
those are the most interesting people to spend time with, I think, are people who they want to know more about life, about what they observe, and they want to know more about people. So it was people, objects, nature, uh, characters, fictional characters that he had to absorb. So somebody like that is just, I would imagine, just a lot of fun to be around. But I'm sure they have moments of sort of intense, maybe where they want to maybe be on their own. Was he somebody who liked to spend time alone with his art, or did it matter?
No, actually the opposite. He never wanted to be alone, which was even tougher for me. I'm a very, I like to be alone. That's when I think best. He loved, when we were married and had two kids, and he would always want, and even before that, when I worked with him, and he always wanted me. I was his personal assistant, so I did a lot of stuff. I, answered the mail. I paid his bills. I answered phone calls. I made appointments. But he always wanted me to sit with him while he was painting. And I said, but I have a million things to do. He's like, do that later. I need you to be here now. And he would constantly like want, you know, and he'd want to go for long walks and he'd want to talk. So we were always having conversation and sharing, which was beautiful. I felt like a partner. You really feel like a part of his life. It wasn't like, he treats you like somebody, oh, go get the brushes or go do this. It was really like, what do you think of this? Can you help me make this color? I had no background in art or paint, and he would ask me to help him mix the paints to get the right color that he was looking for a painting he was doing. And I would say, how am I supposed to do that? It's like, oh, you're good with color. You can figure it out. And I would figure it out. And then I would feel like, wow, I can do things that I never thought I could do. He did that to me every single day. When I, first met him, he would show me. I think that takes a talent for somebody to show you the strengths you have and you don't even realize. Meeting somebody like that, and when he would say, don't ever settle, because you have the potential to do so much. And I would think, nobody ever told me that in my life before I met him. Really, nobody. I didn't grow up in that kind of family where you could be anything you want to be. No, but he was just every day. And it would be the simplest things that would please him or just make him like celebrate. And it was beautiful. It was really, so at times, yes, challenging because he had demons in him that, ran deep, but that probably came from his difficult young life and all the challenges he had as a young boy.
What a extraordinary man. But I think of him as somebody who had the ability to stop and smell the roses while he was running around with his hair on fire.
Yeah, well, he would. he would run around with his hair on fire, but not act like he was running around with his hair on fire. He never was, which that was also amazing to me because I can do a lot of stuff, you know. We can multitask, we're doing this, we're doing that, but I feel frenetic. He was never frenetic. He just managed in his brain to split, you know, the art, and he could be writing a script and studying a part and painting a painting and doing all these things at the same time and never kind of loses cool. Like he never seemed hysterical. I get, you know, if I have too much to do, I start to get hysterical. Like, what do I do now? Never got like that. I mean, we get other people hysterical, so but not him. He would remain calm. Maybe that's why he always looked great on film, because people were always scampering around to do things for him. But he was able to manage multiple artistic endeavors at once, and also be a great dad. I mean, you know, I can't vouch for his other kids, but he never wanted to spend a minute without the kids. You know, where are the kids? Tell them, you know, bring them here in the studio. He would let them sit on the floor in his painting studio and finger paint on top of his canvases, and then he would say, oh, look, that's interesting, now I'll just make a drawing on top. They would put layers of paint on top of, you know, some old painting that he had, because he had these paintings that he would just pack up and travel for 40 years. He's been just like, oh, that's not finished. That's not finished. That's not finished. And then he would just take it out one day and finish it. And he loved playing with the kids, just like, you know, home videos of him like playing horsey, crawling on the floor with them, letting them jump on top of him, carrying my son on his shoulders when he's 80 years old. You just, you know, how physically, you know, and had the mental energy to, you know, always just be with them. After dinner every night, we'd sit in the house and he would say, you know, to our daughter, this is before our son was born, oh, she, you know, she wants to put on a performance, and we'd just like stop the world. And, you know, this was a little ballet performance by a 2-year-old, you know, 3-year-old running around the house. She was the superstar. It was like, okay, forget the TV.
Was there any particular type of art? Now, he both collected art and he produced art. Was there any type of art that was particularly enjoyable for him that he would lean toward more often?
Toward collecting?
Well, let's say for creating, actually.
Well, no, actually, and that's the thing that people find really hard to comprehend when they see his artwork, is that he worked in wood, he worked in iron, he worked in bronze, he worked in clay, in acrylic. So his curiosity about life carried through into his artistic world, you know, his visual arts, because he was always just, he'd see a block of wood and he would want to carve it. He would pick things, I mean, stones up from the beach, and he would bring them into his studio and, you know, put them in a pile, and they became something someday, or didn't. I have baskets full of wooden pieces from, you know, his collection. And so his art, he collected African art, Indian art, Asian art, 20th century paintings, modern, anything. He would gravitate towards something for its color, for its texture, sometimes for its, you know, the subject. Like I'm looking at some of the paintings. Sometimes he learned from the things he collected too, because he was never formally trained as an artist. So he would buy a painting because something about the way the artist layered the paint, and he would say, I want to learn how to do that. So he was constantly reaching out to people. He would go into the art store and he would spend a couple hours with the person behind the desk. You know, how do I get this kind of texture? Or how do I do this?
He was always learning. There was a quote, I think I have the quote correct, a documentary I was watching with Anthony in it. He said, an artist is always looking for something new to say. Do you think that kind of sums up Anthony's view on why he created art?
Yes, I think so. I think that, and I mean, he read the Bible a lot. He read history, he read politics, he read the Bible, he knew every religion, partly because he was studying for roles that he was playing. But the saying, there's nothing new under the sun, comes from the Bible, But sometimes you could find something new to say about, or you could find a different way to say it. And so I think that he was always looking for some way to, because I think an artist's challenge is really, they speak a different language, right? Poets, uh, painters, they see things we don't see. And for them to be able to show us what they see in their head or in their heart and they have to find a way, either through a sculpture, through color, through words, to convey that feeling. And so I think that's, he had things in his brain and his gut that he wanted to express, but sometimes there are no words to express that. So that's through his art. Maybe he did that through a look, or through something that he put on a canvas. So I think, yes, looking for something new, or maybe some new way to say something that you think you've heard before.
Well said, Kathy. Now, sadly, in 2001, you lost. You called him Tony, I would imagine. You didn't
Yeah.
call him Anthony. I'm thinking
Yeah, I call
Anthony
him
Quinn.
Tony. Some people think it's funny when I say Tony. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, especially
Tony.
Europeans say, you mean Anthony, Anthony.
So you lost Tony sadly in 2001. And of course, what a vacuum he must have left. A big personality like that, a big creative person who loved to learn about the people around him and loved to spend time with people around him. So that must have made the house very quiet. But not long after that, you started to think about ways to keep his memory alive. And could you talk about this amazing thing called the Anthony Quinn Foundation? Tell us how it came about in your mind and what it really represents today, what it does today.
Well, I think one of the things that Tony did for me was, I mean, I met him when I was 23 years old, and he was 70. I never met anybody who had the vision, or just he was looking forward to a million projects. He said, I'm writing a script, and I'm doing a play, and I'm doing this painting, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, he's 70 years old. I had never been exposed to an artist like that before, where, I grew up thinking an artist is somebody who paints a painting, and the painting ends up in a gallery or a museum, or an artist sculpts a sculpture and that sculpture is in a museum, or very, very traditional view of what an artist is.
Mm-hmm.
But what he showed me was really, and I'm not, he didn't show me, he showed me through the way he lived, was that he was just always trying to make life more beautiful, maybe say something, but he shared this beauty with everything he did. And he would observe things like that, like, why do you think that person has this broken lamp outside their house? Wouldn't you want to fix it, because it just makes you happy when you see it fixed, right? So he would look at life that way. And I realized, being with him, that being an artist is way more than just painting a painting. And I also realized that 99% of the people you see are artists in some way, right? But they're not selling their work in a gallery, but they're designing cars, they're making the clothes you wear, they're making the food that sits on your table, they're singing the songs that make you happy, like, go through life in a happy way. So, but we don't honor those artists, right? Because we just take it for granted. Oh, this wood floor, or this beautiful piece of furniture. We don't think about those people. I mean, maybe we do if we really think that they're artists, but they're artists, and they started somewhere, and somebody, and like you on your podcast, you've talked to people, everybody is influenced by somebody in their life. And so I thought, how can I make Anthony's life worthwhile. He never would have wanted me to start a museum. And I have enough work, enough of his work, enough of his life that I could pictures, that I could have a museum. But what would a museum, if unless there was constantly people visiting? So I thought, how could I honor his memory? And his life was touched by people like Frank Lloyd Wright, like Mae West, like John Barrymore, people that he just that made that one little impact on him, that then he carried the ball and took it a step further. But people need that. You need to keep looking for people to move to the next level. And I thought, how could we be that for young artists today? And I saw my own kids, especially my daughter. She was, I think, in middle school, who she had been this creative, beautiful, free young girl, dancing, singing, playing. And as she got older, she just went into herself. She said, I don't want to stand out. I just want to fit in. And I said, honey, you don't fit in. You're different. You have all these talents. But she said, I don't want to be an artist. I don't want to be an artist. It takes too much of showing of yourself. So here she is trying to hide it. And I thought, gee, what happens when kids are in school and they're around their peers who are making fun of them, or something that they're doing is a little different. And so I thought, how can we help somebody, these students look inside themselves and really appreciate? And so we started raising money to help high school students, I don't say children because they're not really children, but maybe they are, attend summer intensive arts programs because of getting away. And they apply in all different artistic mediums. They're musicians, they're drawing, computer, animation, they're writers, they're singers, they're dancers. And they tell us, they say, I want to go to, let's say, this school in Chicago that has, for dancers, or I want to go to this art program in Ireland. So they'll identify a program, they apply to us. It's a very intensive, very competitive process. They have to write an essay, they have to show work samples, they have to get like a recommender. And unfortunately, we only have funding to probably help 10 to 15 kids a year. But somebody you had on one of your shows said, one at a time. I think it was William Hung. Just one at a time. Because I used to think, oh, how can helping 5 kids or 10 kids really make a difference? But now we're into our 13th year, and we have 140 kids in our rearview mirror. And some of them are coming back and saying, how can I help? Can I participate in the process? And so we're learning that it really does, sometimes it takes a long time, but you made an impact. And for people to even say that made a difference in my life. So I keep doing it. And it's rewarding. And I know that would be something that he would just be lit up by, because he loved working with kids. They were, pure, and still had that drive to want to do something. And he would just he loved hanging out with young kids, and just their enthusiasm and their energy and their, ability to just be free and not worry about what other people were saying. So
It's really great. When I hear about that, I was thinking, what would Tony think right now about this whole thing? I think he'd be all about it, as you said. I think he would just think it's absolutely wonderful. And
yeah.
I want to ask you, what do you think, Kathy, if you had to have a vision for the foundation, say 5, 10 years from now, what do you see for the future of the foundation?
I have a board, and we talk about that all the time. I mean, I think we all love what we do because it's very personal. And do we expand it? Do we want to just be able to keep doing it, and to and hopefully give more scholarships, and the programs that they go to get more expensive every year, unfortunately. And we give them partial funding, because if we gave them full funding, like let's say Interlochen School of Music, sometimes these programs are upwards of $9,000 for a 6-week program, which is incredibly expensive. but then some of the programs are reasonable. They're, in the $2,000-3,000, and we give them a max of 3,000, and they usually end up having to put something in of their own. I felt like, we started that because we didn't have the funding to fully fund, but that part eliminates the people who just want a handout, and that makes them work for it. And then when they do, and I noticed this with my own kids, if I gave them the money to buy a baseball bat or to buy a tennis racket, they didn't appreciate it as much as if they had to pay, use their money that they worked for. That made a big difference to them and how they treated that. Oh my God, it was my racket. It got stolen. They would treat it better. They would be more careful with it. And that's why the application process is a little bit intense, but they're in high school. And so we're kind of getting them ready for college, and teaching them, if you really want to be an artist, learn to, tell people why, what you want to do, figure it out, like dig deeper in yourself, and tell us why you want to do it. And the judges we have really look at all those factors. It's not just about the best ballet dancer or the best singer. And we spread out these awards in all these different categories. We try, to make sure that we're being equal. And it's been, I've learned a lot, and I learned a lot from the kids who go through the programs and talk to us about it. I know that he would be proud. And this sounds really cheesy, but he is not truly gone, because, sometimes things would happen, or I get down and I think, I can't keep doing this. And something happens that then just gives me another shot of energy. And I know that that's his spirit.
And you have so much around you that reminds you of him and the energy that he had. And
Yeah.
what a great inspiration for, like, if you're feeling down about something, you all of a sudden you think, well, what was his energy level when he created that?
Yeah.
He must have been really charged up. What a source of inspiration to you. And you also mentioned something to me, that for those who may not have been selected for a scholarship, that you actually give feedback to those people who may not have been selected. Is that something that you actually do?
Yeah, I myself don't get involved in that process, but we have these, right now we have 40 extremely talented artists who are our judges, we call them. And each student's application gets reviewed by 3 judges, so that we have this kind of mix of eyes on that application, and they give us a grade, and they also give us some feedback about that student. And so when we're responding to the students and saying, you weren't selected for the scholarship, but here's what some of the judges had to say about your work. It started off because the person Tom Roberts, who is a professor at Rhode Island School of Design, he helped me design the process. And he said one time, he's 80 years old now, but he still gets so deeply involved in it, and he's incredible energy, like, you wouldn't believe. And he said once he applied for a fellowship or a scholarship, and he got back an index card, and it had check boxes on the back. You did not win, you won, and he wondered his whole life why he didn't win. What was it about his application? Because he spent so much time on the application, and what was it that caused him not to receive that award. So he said, I think it would be really helpful if we tell these kids, something about their work. It turned out to be one of the best aspects of the application, because we get thanks all the time from kids who did not win, or their parents said, my son never got any feedback, never got any criticism, constructive criticism. It's never like, you stink, you have a bad voice. It's always like, maybe you should work more on this. Maybe you should, go into, instead of musical theater, regular theater. So I mean, they're productive. They're not corny remarks, and they're very, meant to help someone move in the right direction. And isn't that what you want? Somebody to, kind of prune the branches instead of just chop the tree down and say, you're not good.
I like that. I really like that. But there are 2 things that are really important. One is that you're requiring people to get skin in the game, as they say. They've got some ownership, so that makes them more apt to be serious about something. And the other thing is, for those people who who may not have been accepted, that they're getting some good feedback. So they're more likely to say, hey, I'm going to tweak this and I'm going to try again next year, as opposed to I'm just not good enough.
We've had kids do that. They reapply and then they win. And they say, it was that letter that I got that helped me. Because the next year they come back, it's not the same people reviewing their work, because every year it's different judges reviewing different work. And so it's not totally random the way we assign the judges, but it's, every year we have a different group of kids. So it's not like the same person is going to review that same student. So it's nice.
We've been talking about Anthony. I'll call him Anthony. That's what I started calling Tony to you. Anthony Quinn. We've been talking about his life and what an amazing man in so many ways, but this foundation is your idea, and it is something that really you should be commended on, because it took a lot of, I'm sure, organizational skills. It took a lot of perseverance, and your own personal energy went into this to keep Anthony's creativity and spirit alive by helping young people and inspire young people to look around and create and feel not intimidated by peers, but supported by a community that sees value in their work and their future. So really, really want to commend you on this foundation. How can people find out more about either applying for a scholarship or finding ways to help in some way?
Our website is anthonyquinnfoundation.org, or you can get there by aqfoundation.org. And we don't have a mechanism for volunteering, but we do have a donor, ability to donate. And, I'm based in Rhode Island. And so a lot of what I do, our kids come from all over the country. So, but you know what, with the kids, and this is one thing, if, we ask them now, we didn't used to do this, but we ask them, how do they find out about us? So often it's a teacher. So it's an art teacher or a teacher or a kid, like a big sister, brother, neighbor, somebody from the same school will find out about it. But often it's a teacher who gives that push and says, you can apply to this, because I hear so many of the kids say, I never thought I never won anything. I never thought I would win. I never thought I would get it. And they became different people. I don't know, even if it wasn't the school that they went to, it was the winning something, the receiving this acknowledgement, was so huge. Is, I guess, and I think that's what Anthony did for me. We're just getting that encouragement and acknowledgement. You're really talented. You don't even see you have this talent. And about so many things, that's another story. But you need that. I think everybody needs that, because you have doubts, always self-doubts, and self-doubt is a good thing. It makes you grow, but then having somebody there to say, I think you got it. I think you could do this. And then the rest is up to you. And that's what we kind of do to these kids. We say, the rest is up to you. We did start a fellowship a few years ago because I met some of the kids that had won and they were struggling. And so I said, I asked one of the women who's been a very regular supporter of ours, and she said, why don't you start a fellowship for, those kids who won and who want to reapply for a project that they're doing now. Well, it's a $5,000 award, which is huge for an artist who's just off trying to do an independent project. But we've got a dancer who started her own dance troupe. We have a cellist who started going off and doing collaborations with fashion designers. Then we've got one kid who's about to do a fashion show in New York, and with his own clothing line. He was born in Togo, Africa. And so that fellowship has added just that one extra level of wow, maybe they win in high school, they go to this program, but then they're struggling still to make something happen. And that's an intense process, because they have to completely present a project, and it's only one kid. So I think just takes a little hand holding, but it really comes from them. It comes from within them. And art doesn't change, but the way people express themselves changes. And I think one of the most important lessons I learn when I meet these kids is when they're young, they think they have to pick something. If they like taking pictures, if they like drawing, or if they like poetry, they feel like they have to choose. And Anthony didn't do that. He just kept doing these things. And then one, turns out to be your career. The other one turns out to be a parallel career. And I think that some of them are so multi-talented. We're so used to, when we were growing up, you were either good at this, but you can't be good at everything.
Mhm.
Or you do this or you do that. And even for people to wrap their head around all the things that Anthony did, sometimes they say, oh, it's not possible. He couldn't have been a writer and a painter and a sculptor and an actor, but he was. So you can't tell people they're not, but he was, and he did. And he's living proof. And my house is living proof of, of all the things that he did. It's not, he didn't have, he was magical, but he wasn't able to snap his fingers and make things happen. He worked. There was one interview where somebody asked him what his inspiration was. And he said, inspiration. Picasso said, work, work, work. I get up every morning and I work and I work and I work and I work. That's my inspiration. And then you read, I often, I'll read about writing and how people are, what writers' habits are. They get up every morning and they write for 2 hours and they write. You just have to write something every day. Even if it ends up in the trash can, you have to work. And it doesn't happen overnight. And maybe Instagram and YouTube, and people think they can be instant celebrities, but it doesn't last. In order for it to last, you got to keep bringing it every day.
Wow, this has been fantastic because it's not only interesting to hear about Anthony Quinn's life, but from what we know about movies, what we see of him, the work that he's created, but to hear about Anthony through your eyes and what you observed as his wife. And you're also very inspirational with your foundation and your words about art. I think we're in a time where, man, any time in history, without the arts, there's no oxygen in the room. There just needs to be oxygen in the room, and that comes through the arts. And I know we're very focused on science and technology and business and things, and they're vitally important. However, the arts just really just put breath in our lungs. And thank you for what you're doing. I want to thank you for this interview and the time that you've been able to spend to talk to me and my listeners. And I just thank you again.
I want to thank you for what you're doing, because you are bringing people together and you're bringing people out, and you're such a variety of speakers and podcasts. So I can't wait to dig in more and hear the people you've interviewed, because it's fascinating to me. I was listening to the one about the president's relationships and how relationships change history. It was amazing. I love it. I love it. I love what you're doing. Keep doing it.
Thank you, Kathy. And I hope you have a great day, and keep us posted on the foundation. We'll be following you, and just keep up the good work.
Okay. Thanks, James. You too.
Thanks, Kathy. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your History, Your Story. You can connect with us on Facebook and YouTube at Your History, Your Story, or on Instagram and Twitter at YHYS Podcast. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or a story to tell. Be well and God bless.